We are back and we are joined now by Seamus Malekafzali, journalist writing about the Middle East in publications like The Nation and The Baffler, and also Seamus has a Substack, which we will link to. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Always a pleasure.
So, you have escaped Lebanon, I should say, or left Lebanon in this just extremely scary time. I'm glad to see that you're doing all right. But Israel has been bombarding Lebanon with strikes over the past week, continuing to escalate. Hundreds have been killed, including dozens of women and children. And the strikes are now, I think there was a strike in Beirut, maybe this morning, if I'm reading that correctly, or at the very least outside the Beirut suburbs. Just take us through the past few weeks and what's been happening in Lebanon and the terror that Israel has inflicted upon the population, starting with those pager and walkie-talkie attacks.
Yeah, I mean, the current round of escalation had started with those pager attacks. After the retaliation for the assassination of Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah commander, had gone over in a way that I think was less than what some people were expecting. There was a slight lull in tensions in the country. But once those pager attacks happened, once there were literally thousands of pagers that were exploding, supposedly all belonging to Hezbollah members, but obviously that turned out not to be the case. That and then the walkie-talkie explosions that happened afterward, that shifted the ground under everyone's feet. From there, I could really tell that this was not going to be like other rounds of escalation in the past, and that turned out to be correct. Strikes inside South Beirut, which were previously so infrequent that there were several months between them. Now they happen literally every single day. The bombardments that occurred in South Lebanon over this past week killed, I believe, half the people that died during the 2006 Lebanon war, in terms of numbers. Some of the most violent bombardments in the history of modern warfare in space of one day. And there really is no sign of that abating or moving into some sort of lower grade of warfare, anything close to a solution.
And this is the deadliest attack by Israel on Lebanon since 2006, but we also have the 1982 invasion of Beirut that we can talk about in terms of like what people in Lebanon have experienced as it relates to Israel aggression over the past decades. Can you talk about that cultural memory and that history of Israel's incursions into Lebanon and how that informs the current aggression and people's reaction to it?
I mean, a lot of people in Lebanon, I mean, there are lots of sectors that have expressed extremely racist feelings towards the Palestinians for the actions of the PLO. There are people who hate Hezbollah for a whole variety of different reasons. And then similarly, people who hate the Lebanese forces and all these different things. But generally speaking, despite all of these varieties of hatreds and grievances, nobody is going to be caught dead openly caping for Israel, regardless of anything. Israel and its invasions and the destruction that it caused is the one thing that, generally speaking, even if they have covert relationships with Israel and they do things for Israel, publicly speaking on their behalf is something that is very rarely done inside Lebanon. And all of these wars that have been caused by Israel or have been accelerated by Israel, they've created a system of living in Lebanon that leads it to have built up certain resiliences that other countries might not have. When I do other interviews about this, I think a lot of people are surprised when I talk about the fact that up until very, very recently, Lebanon had been mostly proceeding as normal, and the capital had sort of siloed itself off from the rest of the country and what's been happening down there. People have learned when to panic. They know when to panic. And now we have reached that point where people have started to panic. They know what is about to come. And that is the thing that has struck so much terror into the rest of the country.
Let's pull up a map of Lebanon here just so people can get a geographic sense of what we're talking about. If we could just zoom in closer to the top of the Israel border so we can see. Thanks, guys. So Beirut, you can see there, is far from the Israel border. You can see Golan Heights, which is the southwestern corner of Syria, but obviously Trump infamously recognized the Golan Heights as Israeli territory illegally. But that incursion and that recognition, Golan is right there on the border of Lebanon. So a lot of this fighting happens at the southern border of Lebanon and the northern border of Israel. That has been the pretext for what Netanyahu has asserted. He's speaking at the UN today, that essentially this military operation is so that the Israelis in the north can return to their homes. But you see Beirut, right? You can see that Beirut is quite far from that southern border of Lebanon and northern border of Israel, and yet the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie bombing happened all over the country, set off at the exact same time, which again, if a Muslim majority country's military or militant group within the country set off coordinated bombs in that manner throughout a sovereign nation's borders, it would be called a terrorist attack. Not the same in this instance. But, you know, bombing Beirut and bombing the suburbs of Beirut has nothing to do with Israelis returning to their homes in the north, as you can just see geographically. These actions plus the bombing of these pagers and walkie-talkies, you can only interpret that as a way to sow terror within the population, in my view.
Exactly. I mean, most of this stems back, and I've written about this before, it stems back from the Dahya doctrine, which was something that Israel had been doing in other conflicts, but was really cemented in the 2006 war. The idea being that the way for Hezbollah to be deterred from further actions was to punish the civilian population, its base of support inside South Beirut, which is Dahya. So all of these villages, all of these cities, all these municipalities, they were to be targets regardless of whatever military infrastructure actually existed there, if at all. So in 2006, southern Beirut was bombed extraordinarily heavily. Neighborhoods were leveled, despite most of the fighting being in southern Lebanon, just as it is right now. And a similar thing was implemented in Gaza on a much larger, much more expansive scale, with the entire territory essentially being deemed as one gigantic military base. The idea here is that, yes, if South Beirut is turned into a military zone, that Hezbollah and its support base among the population, among the majority Shia population in these areas, will be cut. They'll be, resentful of their presence, and they will eventually, I don't know what the next step would be. They buckle. And they'd happily accept whatever political system or political solution Israel would want to give them. The issue is that did not happen in 2006. That has not happened now. And even though the population of Lebanon, broadly speaking, is not in favor of a war, they never have been, that does not entail an automatic acceptance of every single thing that Israel has ever wanted to do, not by a long shot.
Well, it's U.S. imperial mentality, right? Which is essentially breaking the backs of people based with bloodshed and militaristic might in order for them to accept the desired outcome of the people doing the bombing. And as you're saying, this has not worked. This has not worked. As evidenced by these multiple instances of resistance over these years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different military calculus than that Israel would be, because Israel, as the actor doing these offensive operations, they can be deterred by cost, while groups which are fighting Israel can, there's costs that have to be considered. Its whole impetus is resistance, of preserving the society in which people live, their way of life, of resisting the, like you're saying, the imperialism of other powers. To say that just because things have become difficult, that they're automatically going to buckle. I mean, what instance in the past, in the modern past, with America, with Israel, has that worked on? In Palestine, over the past 76 years of constant occupation and military resistance, at what point does this start? And I think there is a recognition within the Israeli state that they're never going to, that's not going to happen, which is why you have a lot of right-wing settlers, people who have Netanyahu's ear in this current government, not necessarily talking about just dismantling Hezbollah, which if you haven't dismantled Hamas, how are you going to deal with Hezbollah? But that's a different thing.
Yeah.
But they're talking about settlement. They're talking about settlement in southern Lebanon. They're talking about depopulation. That was something that the Diaspora Affairs Minister mentioned only a few days ago. They're talking about removing what they call explicitly an enemy population in southern Lebanon, of removing it, of making sure that the support base, if they can't be disconnected from Hezbollah, they need to be physically removed so that the problem is no longer there. That's what they're applying in Gaza, in the West Bank, and that's what they're going to apply in Lebanon as well.
And Netanyahu is using the same language that he used as it relates to Gaza when he's talking about their military operations in southern Lebanon. Please leave your homes, he writes in English, and you'll be able to return, people of Lebanon, which is just like essentially a written press release for the West to give justification for when they slaughter people in southern Lebanon, that, hey, we told them, we dropped leaflets, we told them to leave their homes, and they didn't. And so what do you know? And the expansion northward is very concerning. Can you speak a little bit more about Hezbollah's role in this? And I guess, all we hear in this country is that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization and it's Iranian proxy, right? I think we did another interview or I guess it was last week with the guys from Blowback, where this is kind of Cold War era language of it's, they're Soviet proxies. So that justifies essentially them, our military operations against them. But yes, Hezbollah is a resistance group largely, but it also is a civil organization, or it's a political party in Lebanon. It's responsible for certain civilian infrastructure and things like that. If you could just clarify for people what Hezbollah actually is and its role in Lebanon and society there.
Well, Hezbollah, I mean, I don't think anyone who is in Hezbollah is going to deny the inspiration that the party took from the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic leadership that emerged from there. But Hezbollah started because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in the 80s. It did not exist before. You oftentimes hear about the fact that Hezbollah, you get the implication that Hezbollah existed beforehand and that's why Israel had to invade, but that was absolutely not the case. One came before the other. And from there, it was able to expand. It was able to achieve the first and only time in history in which an Israeli withdrawal was predicated on no peace deal or negotiated settlement, but they just up and left in southern Lebanon. That gave them huge credence and support with the Lebanese public. But yes, they're a political party. They are a massive civil organization. They interact with institutions in Lebanon at so many different levels. I want to say in the last election they got the most votes out of any other party in the Lebanese elections. The idea that they're an Iranian proxy, I mean, it's false, obviously false, but I think the best evidence of that is the fact that Hezbollah is so integrated within the Lebanese state and the Lebanese society that it is not going to rise and fall on whatever Iran says. It has its own strategic calculuses to make. If Iran were to say tomorrow, Hezbollah, you have to just drop the whole thing against Israel, that is absolutely not something that they are doing. they are not just thinking about what Iran has to do or what, for example, Yemen has to do, but they have to think about what will the effect of further conflict have on the Lebanese populace itself. That's what informs a lot of the decision making. This is a Lebanese party. This is a Lebanese organization that formed from Lebanese roots. It has inspiration in Iranian politics, but it is not the be all and end all of the situation.
And can you speak a little bit more about how Hezbollah was able to take on such a prominent role within Lebanon, the power vacuum, and why resistance against the Israeli settler state is such a galvanizing force for people within Lebanon, where Hezbollah has had this staying power since the civil war, as you discuss?
Well, I mean, after the civil war, most militias were forced to disband. They were forced to give up their military arms, but Hezbollah was not, because of the situation in southern Lebanon with the Israeli occupation, which they were fighting. Once they were able to achieve that, the purpose of their fighting, their continued military presence, was both completed but also assured for the future. They were able to prove the purpose that they had, the deterrent capacity that they had, the necessity for their defense, because by now, especially by now, they are more powerful than the Lebanese state that they ostensibly protect. They are more powerful and more cohesive than any other institution in Lebanon, civil institution in Lebanon. So while there are many different parties in Lebanon or sectors of the populace in Lebanon that may oppose them, they ultimately are able to act independent of that. But as well, I mean, something that I've had to explain to a lot of people who've tried to talk to me about this is, okay, people don't want war in Lebanon. That's been established by poll after poll after poll. But being against a war coming to Lebanese shores is different from being necessarily anti-Hezbollah. And being anti-Hezbollah is, not automatically, being pro-Israel or something like that. There are a lot of people who are very critical of Hezbollah who, in the face of the gigantic Israeli threat that faces this country, are willing to put aside many other considerations that they would have to make in order to give that support to Hezbollah, to acknowledge, the kind of sacrifices that they have made through this. Speaking personally, in the scenes that I would run in, there are a lot of people that I know who were, gay, trans, socialist, thoroughly critical of Hezbollah, for example, being anti-gay, for instance. But when it comes to this issue, how existential it is, they are willing to put certain things aside to support what they see as an important venture.
Well, yes, and there's something to me so cynical about people in the West picking apart these resistance groups and organizations for their lack of liberal attitudes, when the environment that the United States' imperialism has created in this region is fundamentally anti-liberal. So it's like, what do you expect? What do you expect?
No, this is a larger discussion, but there's a whole thing with the fact that Israel's wars and American imperialism have created environments in which left-wing groups that had a tremendous amount of influence in the 50s and the 60s were destroyed. They had their leaderships, assassinated. And in the wake of that, you had groups like Hamas, you had groups like Hezbollah, who were able to synthesize nationalism and Islamism, and that proved to be a very effective engine for a lot of people and to galvanize support behind them. With almost not just Lebanon, not just Palestine, so many different countries, they destroy groups that do not have necessarily religious connotations with them. And then the groups that inevitably emerge out of that power vacuum are going to be people who absolutely are not aligned with you, aligned civilizationally with you as an American, as an American politician. But that's, yeah, exactly. You've created a situation, and then you want to be like, oh well, we wish it was different. We wish there are certain things that were easier for us to swallow. But like, this is what it is. This is how it is now, and you have to deal with it.
And can you talk about the evacuations that people have had to undergo? I've seen reports up to 500,000 people in Lebanon have had to leave their homes, and that shelters are completely overrun at this point.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing about the evacuation orders that the IDF has been issuing throughout Gaza and now in southern Lebanon. When it was happening in Gaza, the IDF's Arabic spokesman would do things like he would post on Twitter in Arabic that there was only a certain road you have to go through that's safe, and it's only open for the next however many minutes, essentially, acting like this has been up forever, but only you have this much time to get there. And in Rafah, there would be evacuation orders, and then the airstrikes would begin immediately. And it's been the exact same thing in southern Lebanon. The strategy has not changed because it's a strategy that they're absolutely okay with. They issue the evacuation order, and within only a few minutes, they start bombing. In the Bekaa Valley, in the northeast, there was a warning issued that in the next 2 hours, if you are near a Hezbollah site, whatever that means, if you have to get 1 kilometer away, we're going to start a huge bombing run in 2 hours. They start bombing within 15 minutes, essentially. This is a huge swathe of the country that is now basically said you have to get out now. They're all going down the same road system. And similarly in Lebanon, you have these bombs going off all around you. A trip that is now maybe an hour or 2 hours has now become 13. And when you get to Beirut, a place that may be safe, you don't know that for sure, you are now facing a situation in which there are not enough shelters, that you have to sleep on the streets. There is no central government that is able to really help you in any significant way. And you have no way out of the situation. You either have to stay in Beirut, or you have to hope that Syria might be safer for you if you want to cross the border there. There are literally no good options here. There are no positive options or safe options here for many, many, many Lebanese. And that is exactly how Israel would like it to be.
Well, they would like it too, because this is, I mean, again, if we could just put this map up of the region, I think it helps, at least for me, it helps me visually. If you can go to Gaza there, just to show the Gaza Strip, like they want all of this stuff on the Mediterranean. They want the coastal areas, right? Like this is just pure, this pushing the Palestinians into the West Bank, pushing them into the desert of Jordan is what they've always said that they wanted, essentially. And Jordan, and then Lebanon, if you're expanding northward in that area, that's what that aim is too, is to continue to build up settlements and expand Israeli territory along the Mediterranean Sea, which is why the protestations about from the river to the sea from the Israeli state were just so ridiculous, and from Zionists, is because Israel has made has had tangible results in their efforts to conquer from the river to the sea. And it seems that continues to be their imperialist aim in this area in southern Lebanon. And now, the entire population in Lebanon faces that terror, right?
See, this is the thing that people should understand about this. Whenever the argument eventually comes up where people rightfully talk about the want for settlement, not just in Gaza, but further in the West Bank and also in Lebanon, critics will eventually say, well, I mean, no, they're talking about security. They don't want Hamas on their border. They want Hezbollah on their border. These are legitimate things that Israel needs to consider. The thing is that in literally every single scenario in which settlement was preceded by initial invasion, it was about security. That was the justification that was presented to the Israeli public. So the Sinai Peninsula, West Bank, Gaza, also Southern Lebanon back in the 80s and through the 2000s, though there was no settlement that was able to occur there. These invasions happened on the basis of security, and then in almost all of these scenarios, settlement occurred later on.
Yep.
We're talking hundreds of thousands of people who were expelled. I mean, in the Sinai Peninsula as well, people forget this. There was an active attempt to expel Bedouins from the Sinai Peninsula in occupied Egypt, and they were building settlements with tens of thousands of Israelis on them. There is no like the idea that Southern Lebanon being settled, the idea that they want this, it is not implausible. This is something that far-right settlers want to happen. Just a few months ago, there were settlers who were flying, drones, I want to say, into Southern Lebanon, dropping flyers saying that this land belongs to us. This is what they want. So we have to, this is frustrating to me, but I know that this is the case, that we have to continue operating under the guise that we don't know what the game is.
Right.
Like, we understand what the intentions are because it's being announced every single day on Israeli television, in Israeli newspapers, by Israeli government ministers, not people who are on the fringe. But for the past 11 months, and now for these next months, we're going to have to operate on this plane in which we're supposed to pretend that we don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, Seamus, I really appreciate your time today. I'm glad you're safe, by the way, and we're able to get out. I know that I'm sorry you have many friends I'm sure you're thinking about in Lebanon. So I'm thinking of you, and thank you for taking the time to come on the show today to talk about it.
Thank you, Emma.
Really appreciate it.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.